Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello and welcome to Tales from the Fandom, the podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. I am your host, David, and I am participating in the campaign called 2 Pods a Day. The campaign's goal is to introduce podcast listeners to 2 independent podcasts every day for the month of August. And for the month of August and for Tales from the Fandom, this episode with Anthony von Dessauer of the Curse of Silverlake podcast as my guest is the one that is being featured for Tales from the Fandom. So if you're a longtime listener, I hope you enjoy this episode. And for those of you who have found Tales from the Fandom from the campaign, the 2 Pods a Day campaign, I hope you also enjoy this episode. What the podcast is that every week I have a different guest and we talk all about their fandoms, what they like, what they're interested in, favorite characters, favorite stories, favorite romances and fandoms, anything from Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Star Wars, Star Trek, anime, books. We just pretty much cover everything under the sun as long as, there's a fandom base for it. We've talked with people that love cooking shows and Judge Judy. So nothing is too big or too small for this podcast as long as people are passionate about it. So that's what this podcast is. We also do anniversary episodes, movie reviews, TV show reviews, specials on TV shows and movies. We do promote some Kickstarters from time to time. And yeah, so that's really what this podcast is. And I hope you enjoyed this episode with Anthony. And I hope you stick around with us. And please, provide feedback, email us at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com. You can follow us on Facebook at Tales from the Fandom. Find us on Twitter at TalesFTFandom. And we also have a Patreon page at Tales from the Fandom if you are interested in supporting the show. So thank you all. If you're a new listener, welcome. If you're an old listener, thank you for coming back and enjoy this episode. Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, the podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. Today we have a guest that I've mentioned a few times on this podcast during my small introductions prior to several episodes. His name is Anthony von Dessauer. He is the host of Curse of the Silverlake podcast. I hope I got that right, Anthony. And he is joining me to talk about his fandoms as well as the podcast. Welcome to Tales from the Fandom.
Thank you, David. It is an absolute honor to be on the Working Man's Nerdist.
Thank you. I've got to reach out to my my person that does the intro and have him redo it to include that as part of the title.
I'm happy that pleased you.
Oh, it's an incredible honor to even be called something akin to that, as I fight for every listener or person that's listening for the podcast, and I'm just appreciative of people that listen and provide feedback, and you did, and you gave a wonderful review, and I've linked it on the Facebook page, and I was over the moon about it.
Nice. Well, you have an amazing show, and it deserves an audience, so I am so thrilled to be on it.
Well, I'm glad to have you, because your podcast, which is Curse of the Silverlake, right? I just want to make sure I'm getting it right.
It is The Curse of Silverlake.
The Curse of Silverlake. Okay, I'm just adding in
which is not a big deal, because if you do a search for Curse of the Silverlake, you're going to find us. So
okay, so The Curse of Silverlake caught me off guard when I actually found out about it, and we'll talk about your podcast later on in the episode, but I wanted to say that it was the first podcast of a Dungeons and Dragons, not an actual play, that I was able to listen to, because I've always heard about people talking about the different the Welcome to Night Vale and a few other shows, like audio dramas, but yours was the first that I listened to that was very much different than what I'd listened to before, and I really enjoyed it. In fact, I enjoyed it to the point where I was like, oh, I might need to actually go back and listen to this again, just because I want to make sure I'm catching all the details, is because you're used to an actual play, you're used to stuff being told to you over and over again and what's going on and combat lasting a little bit, but just to hear it in a audio drama style is totally different from what I'm used to.
Yeah, I haven't found another show like ours. The closest that I think I've come is God's Fall, which is still an actual play that's just super edited with awesome production values. But an actual audio drama of a campaign, I haven't found another one.
Well, I'm glad that I was able to find yours. I think I found it on, I think it's the Facebook community podcast we listen to, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's a wonderful community. It really is.
It is. It is. And if you people, whoever's listening to this conversation, if you're on Facebook, it is a wonderful group to join. It's called Podcasts We Listen To, and it's a mixture of people who listen to the podcast and then creators like myself and Anthony who let people know about our podcast, not in an overly knocking a club against your head saying listen to our podcast episode, but it's such a great community for feedback and discussion and throwing ideas out there and getting to collaborate not only with like listeners but other podcast hosts, and it's a really great Facebook group.
Yeah, I'd actually say that it's a Facebook group about a podcast called Podcast We Listen To, Jeremy Collins, and he really embodies the essence of podcasting because unlike a radio show, podcasting is more intimate with your audience. And it's kind of, podcasters are kind of like a creative family that support one another. And I'm not saying they all do, just like any other community, there's bad apples, but that group just really embodies the general supportive nature of podcasting, and it's very cool.
Absolutely. So everyone go check out that Facebook page. But for now, Anthony, what are some of your favorite fandoms that you are into?
So my favorite fandoms include Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, Joss Whedon, just about anything, but especially Firefly.
I love all three of those. I remember getting one of my first books as a preteen was the Tolkien trilogy. But let's dive into Star Trek first. When did you first get into the Star Trek fandom? Was it at a young age? Was it maybe like teenager? What series? Was it the movies, Next Gen, original? Where did you enter into the Star Trek fandom?
Because of my father, Star Trek has always been a presence in my life. But as far as the point where it really, where I really became part of the fandom would have had to have been in my adolescence with the Next Generation. Like the UPN would just have several episodes of the Next Generation back to back, and I could just binge them. And this is before Netflix or anything like that. So it was nice to have that opportunity to travel the stars with Captain Picard and, Riker and Data and Geordi and all the wonderful characters.
Right. It's hard to imagine because you have a toddler and I've got 3 kids of my own, and they're used to consuming on demand, essentially. Whatever Netflix gives them, they are able to watch it. And for us, I remember hunting for when like a Star Trek episode was going to come on. If I had missed it, like, was it going to be rerun at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, setting the VCR to try to catch it. I mean, you were lucky if you were able to be able to watch what you were looking for at the time that you could actually watch it.
Yeah, if you missed it, you were stuck. Done deal.
Yeah, yep. There was a time where I didn't have cable. Speaking of Joss Whedon's shows, and I had moved out wherever I was living, and I didn't have cable for a good 2 or 3 months. And I think it was the season finale of Buffy. Maybe season 5 or season 6, and I had to order VHS copies from someone online who would send them to me in the mail so I could watch them like a week later.
Oh, that's rough, man. So but the season finale.
Yeah. Yeah, so you do what you got to do to get it.
Yeah, you committed all that time, and then you You got to wait for the postman.
Absolutely. So is Next Generation your favorite Star Trek series, or do you have a other one that you prefer the best?
I sincerely enjoy all of the series. The movies, not so much, but Deep Space Nine is a treasure, and I think it's underrated and underappreciated. I think some of the best Star Trek is on Deep Space Nine.
I love Deep Space Nine, and I'm usually alone in saying that. Either I have my friends that are either Next Generation fans or Star Trek Voyager fans, and I'm really the one that's alone on Deep Space Nine, but I feel like you got to experience a lot of everyday Star Trek life as opposed to the polished like Next Generation or Voyager, where they're confined on the one ship and they're like going through the Delta Quadrant, which is a very cool concept and I loved it. But Deep Space Nine, there was just something about it where you never knew, like sometimes with the characters, you never knew where the characters were going to go. You never knew what was really going to happen. They had so much action between, say, like the Cardassians, the Klingons, the Dominion, politics on Bajor. I mean, everything was encompassed in that series.
Yeah, and one of the unique things on Deep Space Nine was the consistent presence of religion.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of science fiction, or a lot of people that write science fiction, they just kind of exclude religion, as religion is a prehistoric human condition, and in the future we won't need it anymore. But I don't think that's very realistic. I think people will continue to be spiritual, and the whole Bajoran culture and the whole plot of the overarching series was about Sisko's involvement, prophecies, and I enjoyed that.
Right. In fact, I mean, there are whole story arcs in Deep Space Nine where it's them getting tangled up into the politics of the religion on Bajor. Who is Sisko going to back for like the next? I believe it was Kai was that highest religious ranking,
Right.
And they really got into it, and it went overarching with Sisko and Kira and the planet and the people that even came up to Deep Space Nine, and it permeated the series, and it was wonderful just to get to watch that. I mean, I love the starship battles as much as everyone else, but it's nice to just get like some really grounded storylines that you can connect with too.
Yeah, and that's what Star Trek is. Star Trek is not starship battles. While those do occur and they are awesome and we all love them, Star Trek is a story that is about us versus ourselves. And these explorers, these people, they go to, they boldly go where no one has gone before. And when they face a threat or an alien, the story is not so much about how do they overcome that threat or that alien. It's more about how do we stay within our value system of what it means to be human and overcome this challenge without losing ourselves. And that makes it different, as opposed to Star Wars, which is wonderful, but it's a space opera, good versus
Right.
evil. It's not so much a philosophy. I mean, you could argue that being a Jedi and, the Force and all that stuff is certainly a philosophy. But with Star Trek, it's all about we the people versus our own core values, dealing with situations that are new to us, that challenge who we think we are.
Absolutely. Who on Deep Space Nine was your favorite character?
Oh, that's a difficult situation, or a difficult question. Sisko was a solid captain, and I could kind of appreciate that. I don't know if I would you know what? Quark. I'm going to have to go ahead and say that Quark was my favorite character. And that's actually a very unusual choice for me because typically my favorite characters in stories are like the simple, humble, kind of loyal character that struggles through and is kind of like morally intact. But Quark was just fun because he was obviously a good guy, but there was a lot of nuance, and nuance is fun in stories.
Absolutely. And Quark, not only like he was kind of like that gateway character if you ever needed something or you needed somebody to kind of insert into a plot, like you could really pull Quark because Quark got to he got to come out from the bar and he got to actually get storylines with Ferengi storylines, Starfleet storylines, Cardassian storylines, Dominion. I mean, he was involved in everything. And he's one of those characters where it's just so much fun to watch, especially the development between him and Rom and Nog, as well as like his relationship with Cisco and Kira and Odo. And it like those watching those interpersonal relationships are always wonderful to see them develop.
Yeah, there's no scene with Quark and Odo that isn't, a gem. They're always good. They're like a married couple almost. You know what I mean? Like they're inevitably linked to one another, but they're constantly bickering. But at the end of the day, they both kind of need each other.
Absolutely. For me on Deep Space Nine, I always loved Chief O'Brien, but it's because I got to know him on Next Generation for so long, going from random background character to where he starts getting his own storylines, and then he and Keiko get to go to Deep Space Nine and just continue that development. And he was a wonderful character. I really enjoyed getting to see him grow.
Yeah, he's solid, like working class character, which is always somebody that's very easy to cheer for.
What was your favorite like story arc or storyline for Deep Space Nine?
With Deep Space Nine, my appreciation is more in specific episodes.
Okay.
So with that element, there are moments where Deep Space Nine kind of reached back into the spirit of the original series, because the original series didn't have big overarching stories. Deep Space Nine obviously did.
Yep.
But the episode where the Tribbles ended up on Deep Space Nine, and I forget exactly, they went back in time, and then it was the Deep Space Nine cast edited in with the original series episode.
Yes.
It was masterful. It was just beautiful. It was a combination of something brilliantly new and comfortingly nostalgic all in one. And that's what I feel is the mastery of Deep Space Nine and why it's underrated, because I don't think people appreciate those episodes, or like the baseball episode.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, that's not part of some greater overarching storyline, but it just captured the essence of humanity while involving aliens.
Yeah, that one was a really good episode. I know that for me with Deep Space Nine, I mean, we talked about the religious and political ones a lot earlier, but I really, as far as characters go, I really loved getting to see relationships build, like between Dr. Bashir and Garrick, for example. And I love Garrick as one of those background characters where he's around and then all of a sudden he's got this really cool background story going on and dealings with the Cardassians. And I love the Jadzia Dax and Dax's relationship to Cisco, and then Dax's relationship with Worf when Worf joined the show. I mean, there's just so much good. And you can tell, like, with Next Generation that there's weaker episodes on Next Generation. There's weaker episodes on Voyager, but I feel like Deep Space Nine, those are few and far between. If you get to just sit down and enjoy the show.
Yeah, and I think they had the benefit of having all the experienced writers, because Deep Space Nine started, while they were still working on other things. So they had the benefit of experienced cast coming in, like when Worf came in or O'Brien came in. These are beloved characters that have. Worf was great on Deep Space Nine. He came with Alexander, which was an extension of a story arc from the Next Generation that then continued on into another series. And then you get the whole day-to-day life, like you were mentioning before, where you see people's religions, but you also see people's families. Sisko's son was there. Quark's nephew was there. And it was not just all about the intrigue of, some attack or some act of espionage, but also how you deal with those things while there's family members on board, which, there was family members on board, the Next Generation, but they were rarely ever an active part of the story.
Right. I mean, they'd show up, like, Alexander would show up occasionally when he was much younger, like with his problems being a Klingon on a starship full of non-Klingons, and Worf's the only Klingon in Starfleet. And generally, if it was showing up in Next Generation, it was kind of shoehorned in for like their random acts of like what's going on, besides like 10 Forward or the occasional poker game. But with Next Generation, you just get to see that the actual, they are in a area where they've just kind of taken over from an occupation. They're all learning to deal with who they are and what's going on in this new normal that they're trying to establish. And I just feel it's a better story to watch, and it seems more true to real life than Next Generation, especially Next Generation, because of just like the differences. Like, things are breaking down on Deep Space Nine because they're old. It's not because some plot device on Next Generation or Voyager is making them break down.
Yeah, and it's not Starfleet tech.
Right.
It's a Cardassian base. So you got that whole thing going on.
Yeah, Deep Space Nine is one of those shows where I always try to tell people to watch it. In fact, I know that there are probably a few people listening right now that have just started watching it because I've made that push for them to watch it, because they've watched Next Generation, they probably watched Voyager, but they had skipped Deep Space Nine for whatever reason. And I know that with my generation of Deep Space Nine, there was the people that came out on the Deep Space Nine side of things and the people that were watching Babylon 5 at the time and completely shunned Deep Space Nine. And they both are great shows, and I feel like those people that are into Star Trek that maybe missed out on Deep Space Nine really need to go and take a look at it, because it's just a well done show.
Absolutely. And that the Deep Space Nine Trouble with Tribble episodes is like top 10 Star Trek episodes. That one alone, if you're not going to watch anything else, watch that one episode and fall in love.
There you go. And then if you're in it for big starship battles, they've got that in spades with the Klingon versus the Klingons, and then the whole Dominion War is pretty amazing for going into a Star Trek series and you've never really seen multiple ship on ship battles like that. It's visually stunning, and you can't even fathom seeing like all these Cardassian and Starfleet or Romulan and just all these incredible ships that you see like go 1-on-1 or maybe like 2 or 3-on-1, but you're seeing hundreds of them in this huge battle in the Delta Quadrant or Gamma Quadrant.
Right, yeah. What's not to like? Huge Starfleet battles.
There you go. Another fandom that you're into, and I got into it at a very young age. I was gifted the books when I think I was 12, maybe about 12 years old. I was gifted the Lord of the Rings trilogy plus the Hobbit in like a very nice collector's box set. And that's how I got into Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. How did you get into Tolkien?
Tolkien has been around my life for as long as I can remember. I think my first experience with it was when I was really little with the old animated Hobbit movie.
Oh, yes. That I remember watching that probably before reading the books.
Yeah, and that's a treasure. Just the animation style. It was just a lot of fun. And it's a wonderful story. And then when I got old enough to read them, I read them. And what's not to like? It's the ultimate good versus evil story. And the animated Hobbit movie, it was absolutely fantastic. They sang the songs that Tolkien read. It was extraordinary. And then when I got old enough to read the books, I don't know how I got them. They may have been my father's copies that I originally read. And it's just the ultimate story of good versus evil. It's in a fantasy setting. Tolkien is the base for everything fantasy that we understand. And it used to be so niche and not mainstream, and now it is. But if you're watching a show or reading a book and that book has elves and dwarves and orcs, that came from Tolkien. So Tolkien is to fantasy what Shakespeare is to playwrights, if that makes sense.
It does. And, you talk about that classic Rankin Bass animated The Hobbit. And I have so much love for that movie. I mean, right now, probably watching it, I'd be like, oh man, it's kind of cheesy.
Nope, holds up.
But it does. It holds up. And in fact, I loved going off the books for a moment and talking about the movies. I loved the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a movie series. I did not like The Hobbit as a movie trilogy series. I liked parts of it. I didn't like all of it. And I really liked how Rankin Bass was able to really transform what they did in the animated version to simply one movie.
Yeah, and they took a lot of license when they did The Hobbit. They were fairly faithful with the Lord of the Rings. I wasn't too pleased that Gimli was kind of a joke.
Mm-hmm.
The dwarves were. He was like the silly sidekick a little bit too often, and then you get random things like Legolas, surfs down the stairs on his shield. But
right.
for the most part, it was fairly faithful. The relationships were dead. Were right on the money. Like the opening scene where Gandalf is in the cart riding through the Shire, and Frodo just leaps onto the cart and gives him a great big hug. It's legit. That's how it was in the book. These people loved each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was well represented, and I appreciated that. But yeah, the Hobbit movie, they just a little bit too much creative license on something that is masterful to begin with. So it's okay to just kind of stick with what Tolkien wrote, because what he wrote was amazing.
Right. And it's not like The Hobbit is... I always say The Hobbit's not really like heavy lifting as opposed to the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Right.
Because I can read The Hobbit in a few hours. It's not hard to get from beginning to end. I mean, obviously I've read it probably 10, 15 times, so I know what's going to happen and I can kind of go with the flow, but it's not a book where you're sitting down for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however fast you read to read one of the books of the trilogy.
Right. It's The Hobbit is poetry, and it's meant to be simple and straightforward with these huge themes of, Bilbo, you're such a small person in such a big world, but the bravest step is the first step of all. It's like a life lesson. The greatest challenges that you face in life, no matter how terrifying, can all be overcome, but they don't begin to even be overcome if you don't take that first step. And it doesn't matter if you're this little guy, take that first step.
Absolutely. And before we'll get back to the books in a second, but I wanted to say about The Hobbit specifically as far as the movie trilogy goes is I was super excited when they showed off all of the dwarves. When before the movie started, you got each of they had their character photo and a poster, and you have all these different looks and visually pleasing characters, and then you get to the movie and they focus on Thorin, obviously, who's you expect for them to focus on because he's a major character in The Hobbit.
Yeah, he drives the plot.
He drives the plot, and then you get Fili and Kili, and then almost all of the other dwarves are just in the background doing whatever. And it was so disappointing to me that you have these visually stunning, appealing character designs on these wonderful dwarves, and you don't even get a morsel of background on them or why they're part of besides, that they're following Thorin. You don't get anything on them. And that was probably one of the most disappointing things in the Hobbit movies for me personally, was the lack of getting just something about all of those dwarves.
Right. And especially when you take the time and effort to stretch it out to make it a bigger thing that it is, and then you leave that out because in the story, Bilbo was lucky number 14.
Mm-hmm.
So all those dwarves mattered. You see, and they were a brotherhood. They were the first fellowship. And yeah, you're right. Just mostly non-existent.
So getting back to the books, do you have a favorite book of Tolkien, either Hobbit, Fellowship, Two Towers?
I would definitely say it's The Hobbit. There was one other thing I wanted to say about that animated series.
Yeah.
It is the only VHS that remains in my house.
Now here's the question, because I had videotapes for a time. Do you still have a VCR to play that VHS?
I don't. It's just a little piece of treasure. I need to put it up in my studio, actually. I have my studio here where I put up my, my things that I love, my fandoms, and I got to find a place for that.
Yeah, that's always the funny thing is I held on to videotapes for such a long time, didn't have a VCR player to play them, and finally just had to get rid of them.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. You can't get rid of your Hobbit VHS. You just can't. But The Hobbit is definitely my favorite book from Tolkien, and I like it because it's simple, it's pure, and the themes. The Lord of the Rings is absolutely fantastic, and they're so nuanced, and they're a great read. But The Hobbit really focuses in on Bilbo, who believes he is insignificant, while in fact he is very significant by his actions, despite the fact that he's shorter than everyone else, he's less skilled. It's just he has the courage to be the person to act when they need somebody to act, and that is his power, and that's beautiful. It's inspiring, actually. And that phrase, the bravest step, oh, Jesus, I think I'm going to butcher it, but essentially the bravest step is the first step of all. is it's a mantra when, you know, working on your podcast. You know, you can say that for yourself, because there's so much that can get in the way of you just simply starting and just simply doing it. And we all have these dreams, and it's easy to just let them disappear in the fog of work and responsibility and hard times. And they're important too. And you got to take that first step. And it's an act of courage. And I could just like visualize, you know, if Bilbo can take that first step into the mountain to go face off with Smaug, I can sit my butt down and start working on the next chapter of whatever it is that I'm working on.
Absolutely. And, you know, you think about Bilbo, and he's been living in Bag's End for as long as, you know, as long as he's been there. And for him to just to take that first step and to go on this adventure with the dwarves and with everyone else, it's like, it blows my mind, because you don't normally find that. And it's like, again, everyday Hobbit basically gets up to go do something on such a grand scale, because they don't think like the hobbits aren't really like out there to go do stuff. They're in the Shire or in the surrounding countryside. Basically, they don't get out in the world of men and elves and dwarves and stuff.
Yeah, and the theme is consistent throughout the whole book. So I just mentioned where he's bolstering himself up to take that first step to go into the mountain and deal with Smaug. It's the exact same thing when the dwarves show up, taking that first step to leave to go with Gandalf and the dwarves. Or when the dwarves are captured by the trolls and he's the one that's got to deal with it. Take that first step. Or when he falls into the darkness and meets Gollum, and now he's got to figure out how to deal with Gollum. He's constantly in a place where he has to deal with a conflict that is so much bigger than he is. He has no idea how he's going to handle it, but it's got to be handled. You know, hobbit up and take the first step.
Is Bilbo your favorite character in the Tolkien series?
No, Sam is.
Okay. I
Yeah.
love Sam. Sam is my favorite.
He embodies my favorite type of character. Like when you asked before, my favorite character in Deep Space Nine was Quark, and I said that's an unusual one.
Mm-hmm.
Sam is like my idealistic favorite character. He's capable. He's loyal. You know, to the point he followed Frodo to hell, essentially, based purely off of the fact that Frodo is my friend and I will not abandon him, to the point where Frodo is driven into madness and is even like toxic and harmful to Sam. And Sam's just like, nope, you're my boy. And if you're going to the fires of Mount Doom, you are not doing that without me. And I just love that about him.
I love Sam. And I know that there's always talk about, you know, Sam being one of those main characters in the story, even though if he's not meant to, he kind of becomes, I think that there's even a chapter called like Samwise the Brave or Samwise the Hero in the later books. And maybe on the soundtrack. I can't remember where it is. And it's like, yeah, Sam is like one of those main characters in the story where he is that steadfast companion. He might not be doing like wearing the ring and doing that heavy lifting, but he's the one that's having to pick up the pieces and pick up Frodo literally and carry him into Mount Doom.
Yeah, and his power is his character. I don't mean character like the character of a story, as in like his power is like the content of his character. While there's other people like Aragorn, who's like this amazing swordsman, or Gandalf, who's a wizard, or all these people who can like physically or magically do all these amazing things. Sam's power is his loyalty. And that is relatable to the real world because in our daily life, that loyalty is also powerful. I can't cast fireballs. If you give me a sword and expect me to slay something, it's probably going to be a mess. But if somebody, needs me to have their back and take care of them and lift them up when maybe they're not in their strongest moment, I got you. I can do that. And it's important that we do that for one another. And Sam is the literary embodiment of that virtue. He is who we would all like to be, and he is who we all hope other people would be. And if everybody in the world was like him, the world would be a much better place.
Absolutely. I always talk about when I reach out to people, I send out a questionnaire, and it just talks about fandoms or what you're into. And one of the things that you wrote, because the next fandom that we're going to talk about is you were watching the animated Hobbit movie while your dad played Dungeons and Dragons. And I assume that's how you went from just watching Tolkien to actually getting to play in the world or realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
Your assumption is correct.
Hooray!
Well done. So the specific fandom that I answered when you gave me the questionnaire was that I'm part of the fandom of homebrew tabletop RPGs. And the story behind that is, my father would get together with my uncle and their buddies, and they would have these epic gaming sessions, and I was 5 or 6, so you're not going to be a part of that, but we went to my uncle's house, and my aunts were there, and my cousins were there, and that's what they were doing. And we would watch, The Hobbit, probably Star Wars. We would play with each other, but every now and then you just kind of sit on the periphery and just listen to the game, and there's no way that you can't be captivated by the fantastic nature of it. So when I got older, I wanted to participate, and I wanted to do that because that sounds like fun.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. At 11, 12 years old, you don't have any money. and in order to play D&D, you got to have a player's handbook. You got to have modules, dice. You have to have stuff, and that stuff costs money, and we didn't have any. So we just kind of had to wing it. Getting dice wasn't a big deal because my dad played. So, right. He would let me have a set of dice. Pen and paper is something that, young adolescents can come across. And the basic concept of tabletop RPGs has nothing to do with rules. So you don't have to go drop $100 on a bunch of books to play a tabletop RPG. You just have to understand what they're about. And what they are is a collective storytelling experience that involves an element of chance. And the goal is to build these beautiful little story artifacts. And the perfect example is one of your recent shows as of this recording, where you interviewed your buddy about tabletop gaming. And for a good solid moment, he was just telling you his experiences of playing different games and the stories and the things that happened in those games. And when you relay them, it's completely fictional, but you talk about it like it actually happened.
Right.
Because you and your friends got together and collectively told a story, threw in some chance so that you didn't know what the outcome of the story was going to be. And the result is an experience that you created that is entirely unique and cannot be recreated or experienced in any other way. And you can do that without a core set of rule books. Not that I have anything against D&D or, Savage Worlds or any of the other fantastically crafted RPG systems. But we started doing that because we didn't have the money to buy the books, and then we just stuck with it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it.
So have you been playing in your same homebrew world since that time, or have you kind of retooled it as time has gone on?
It definitely gets retooled. Some of the elements pass on because and I played with a lot of the similar groups of people. The people that I'm playing with now are the people I played with when I was 11, 12, 13, 14.
Mm-hmm.
So those story artifacts that I was mentioning before that we created, those are beloved moments in the collective storytelling experience, and we're not going to abandon them. So then when we create new stories, we can reference those things, and it adds to the fun and the grandeur of the new thing.
I imagine that your homebrew is similar in vein as far as like a high fantasy magic setting akin to like Dungeons and Dragons, or is it more so like Tolkien-esque as far as magic in the world?
It can change to whatever we would like it to. So the advantage of homebrew is it's super dynamic. So most of the time it is high fantasy and magic. But if you're in the mood to sail on a starship and fight some aliens, it's not all that difficult to just kind of shift over to that because everybody's on the same page.
Right.
So you just sit down and you spend a little bit of time and you change the things that obviously need to be changed, and then you do it. In a core system, there's a lot of faith in the rules because the rules are the structure. In a homebrew system, there's a lot of faith in the DM because the DM creates the structure. So in order to play a homebrew, you got to have a solid group that is willing to defer to the DM. With D&D, you can get kind of rules lawyery.
Yep.
Where people challenge the DM, and that stinks, man. Don't do that. Even if you have rules, don't do that. That's not creating a collective storytelling experience. That's just metagaming. And, metagaming is the same thing as finding an exploit on a video game. Like, that's not what it was designed to do. You just figured out how to game the system.
Right. I used to play with someone in college who was very much the rules lawyer and would often pause the game while he looked in the book for the actual answer if he didn't like what the answer that was given to him.
Well, God bless him. Your games were fun.
Oh, yeah. They definitely had an element of fun. We actually left his character. He was playing a paladin at one time, and we as a group were like, no, we're not following you anymore. You're not the leader of our group, and we are leaving you.
Okay, so that is just the most beautiful example of defeating the metagame with the collaborative, collective storytelling experience. I love that.
Going from homebrew tabletop to what you are doing now, you are the podcast host and creator of, and let me get this right so I can be correct on this, The Curse of Silverlake. You're an RPG podcast. It is an audio drama though versus an actual play, which is what a lot of people have going on right now. So if you're listening, you've most likely listened to an actual play podcast versus an audio drama of your podcast.
Yeah, there's so many actual plays out there, and they vary in quality. And I've listened to a lot of them because they're in my wheelhouse, and their audience is similar to my audience, and I enjoy some of them very much. But what I do is definitely much different, and the development of it began with my group of players growing up and, having jobs and families and not being able to get together for, epic weekend gaming sessions.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah, but we still wanted to do it. So I just created a Facebook page, the Curse of Silverlake, invited my players, which are my father and my two buddies, and just said, hey, let's just do it on Facebook. I'll create a simple homebrew system that is easy to understand and is better manageable for play by post, and we'll just do it that way. And that's what we did. We played for about a year, and one of the players, and my good friend Daniel Dye, is an actor. He's an experienced actor. And I was getting into podcasts. So I approached him and I said, hey, wouldn't it be kind of fun if we dramatize this and turn it into a podcast? So that's what we did. And it's been a wonderful experience. Right now, we actually only have 4 episodes because an audio drama is a much bigger and much more difficult production to put together than the average podcast. It's definitely much more difficult than a live play, because a live play, you set up microphones and you play. And if you play for 4 hours, you have 4 one-hour episodes ready to go.
Right.
And so ours is I have to write a script and then I have to put it together. And at first, I didn't even realize that what I was doing was an audio drama. Right now, the intro to the Curse of Silverlake, if you listen to it, I call it a scripted retelling of an RPG campaign between my friends and I. Somebody had to point it out to me that what I was doing was an audio drama. So in the new episodes that I'm working on, I actually changed that intro. I love it. It's a huge learning experience. And it's given me an opportunity to do something with the collective storytelling experience that my friends and I have built. And enter the world of podcasting.
Is the game still going on as you're making the episodes, or is the game concluded and you're going back and incorporating everything and now writing everything into the audio drama style?
Yes and no. So the campaign that listeners are currently listening to has ended. And I've learned a lot about running a campaign online and then also running a campaign with the intent of strangers listening to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very different thing. So we are playing a second campaign, which goes back to something you mentioned earlier. It's not in a fantasy setting. This second campaign we're calling it a one-shot, and it takes place in the same world of Silverlake, but instead of the characters being part of the Guild of Volitnikov, and wielding swords and magic, they're part of the Volitnikov Motorcycle Club in the 1970s.
Sweet.
Yeah. So, and the purpose of this quote unquote one shot is to give me time to refine the second edition of the rule set, which is going to take place in Silverlake in the 1890s in kind of a Wild West setting.
Okay.
Where it's not going to be steampunk because, I don't know, I just decided it wasn't going to be steampunk, but it is going to be, the fantasy characters and races, but instead of swords and magic, it's going to be, 6 shooters and magic.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about right now, I'm just trying to rack my brain real quick, and I can't think of a setting that mixes the fantasy with that Western setting.
Yeah. Oh, and that gets back to what I was saying before so when I started off, and I began to understand that I'm producing something that other people may want to listen to, it suddenly occurred to me that people may not want to listen to a campaign where adventurers go and kill some kobolds, because anybody that has ever played D&D has killed some kobolds. And it's not to say that they won't enjoy it, but maybe have them fight something different that they've never heard of. Give them a new and different experience. And that's where the second edition of the Player's Handbook that I'm writing takes place in that era and under those circumstances. And even as I was creating the first campaign, as we started moving forward, there was a point where my characters were about to face orcs. Orcs were going to enter the picture. And I completely changed it because I was like, how many times have we fought orcs? You know, you can supplement another monster for orcs that can serve the same purpose of being a scary, powerful antagonist, and you can make them something different. And because it's different, you have a different experience. And that's exactly what happened. And the game got much better.
That's always one of the things that I think, you know, traditional D&D DMs have is you have fallback monsters. And it's like, what do I need to do? Okay, kobolds or orcs or bugbears or owlbears or whatever the case may be, when you could actually substitute something in and change the entire story just by that one substitution of something that they come up against.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. So in this new version of the game, there's a creature that is replacing kobolds. So kobolds in a tabletop system are usually like a base level creature that your beginning characters can fight, and it gives them a challenge. Most likely won't kill them, but they're just those weaker characters. So instead, I've replaced them with a creature that I've named the Armadin, and they are about the same physical dimensions as a kobold, but instead of being like a rat man, they're kind of more like an armadillo man.
Okay.
So then so what you have is you have a creature that serves that same function, but now it's also a creature that has a protective shell, and it functions a little bit differently. So the story is going to be different, and the interaction that you have with them is going to be different, and the way the characters solve the problem of fighting them in combat is different. And that's what you want. That's the purpose of a story. If tabletop role-playing games are a collective storytelling experience, and what you want to do is you want to tell new and interesting stories.
What's the hardest part for you to transition from what you did with the play-by-post and turning it into your audio drama?
This was a hard lesson, and I probably lost listeners. So in episode 1, I copied and pasted, and I had a script. And then what I did is I corrected it for grammar, made a few changes, and then that's what we narrated. And that doesn't work because that's not an audio drama. It's like reading Cliff Notes. So as episode 1 and 2, I was kind of learning that. And then episode 3 and beyond, I kind of started to understand that I needed to piece all this stuff together to have like those overarching themes, character development. I have one Ryan Whitechurch plays Darius Delfold, and he's not a real talky guy. Like in game, he's all action. He's all about how do we kill this thing? What kind of treasure does it have? Let's buy some better weapons, which is cool. That's what you do. That's how you play the game. But in the context of creating a story, he doesn't say much. So I've added lines, and I've created a character around his character who is kind of a roguish smart aleck. And it plays well, and it's some of the stuff that he says and does is absolutely hilarious, and I'm having a lot of fun writing him. And that's probably the biggest change, to directly answer your question, is to take it from just writing that play by post and turning it into a more cohesive story that can be understood. Because I have some listeners who actually haven't played D&D. So if they listen to like episode 1, they fight kobolds, and then I run through the list of loot. Like they found, 3 gold pieces and they found this and that. And in the context of a story that kind of doesn't make sense. And if you're writing the story like, oh, this person attacks and then that person attacks and this person attacks, it's not very exciting. So I had to boil down the fight scenes into like what actually happened. Did anybody get seriously injured? Was there any amazing heroic things that occurred? And then actually rewrite the battle like something that you would read in a book.
As we're recording this, we're recording on June 25th. You currently have 4 episodes out for everyone to listen to. How many more episodes do you think you're going to have for the podcast, or is it like to be determined at this time?
It's to be determined. I'm a firm believer in something takes as little or as much as it takes. So I'm going to keep going until it's done. And if it only requires a handful of episodes, I'm not going to force extra episodes. If it requires a bunch, I'm going to keep going until it's done. Right now, I'm currently working on 6 episodes. That would be episode 5 through 10. I'm trying to get all the writing done right now so we could record in July. And then once I have everything recorded, I'm going to release them monthly.
Okay.
And then by doing that, I'll have 6 episodes. If I release them once a month, then I'll have 6 months to work on the next 6. And hopefully I can be reliable in releasing my content, because I have not been in the past, because it takes so much work. It's, just step 1, you have to go through these battles that they have when we play by post. Sometimes it's like 200 or 300 posts from the time the battle starts to the time the bad guy is dead. And you got to sort through all that, copy and paste it, turn that into an understandable script, and then write it as something interesting. Takes a long time.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I ran a play-by-post game for about a year, or a little bit over a year, and the amount of comments back and forth and amount of threads that were going on, and it's just, it got to be unwieldy if you had to go back and reread anything.
Yeah, and play-by-post is a lot of fun. It's cool because you can do it whenever, but you definitely have to establish a rule set that says, like, you must respond within a certain amount of time or else your turn is skipped.
Right.
Because if you have 4 players and 3 of them are being active at that moment in time and one of them is not, and everybody's waiting on them, then what happens is your other players start to not become active. And then nobody's active. And then you got to rally the troops. Like, come on, guys. Everybody's got to participate. And so it helps that the people I'm playing with are my father and my close friends. So there's no offense. If you're playing with strangers and you start skipping their turns because they're not showing up, then you could end up, losing a player or having hard feelings or something like that.
Exactly. I think our rule was always, you had 2 days to respond, especially when it was like when we got into combat. It was, okay, you guys, you've got 2 days to be able to log on, even if it's just for a few minutes, just to check and see if your turn is up or to make your action. That's all you need to do. Like, it wasn't that difficult to just log in, essentially.
Yeah, and we've been doing this for years now. I'm not exactly sure how many years we've been doing it. 3, maybe 4 at least. And people do things. Guys go on vacation.
Yep.
That's not a big deal. They just, hey, I'm going camping with my family this weekend, so I'm not going to be able to respond. Cool. No problem. We can make amends for that. But when somebody just blinks out and doesn't show up, then everybody else is waiting for them. That's the one downside to play by post, but it's counterbalanced by the fact that you can have a game anytime, anywhere. If the only time you have is at 10 o'clock right before you go to bed, you can spend that 10 minutes, playing a game with your friends. And that's pretty cool.
Now, for those who are listening and they want to either check out the podcast or your Facebook page or website or social media, what are the best places for them to do so?
Well, listening to the podcast, you can find it on iTunes or your favorite podcatcher just by doing a search for The Curse of Silverlake. Our Facebook page is extremely active because that's where we play the game. So if you want to comment on our episodes or tell us that we stink and stop doing it, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/SilverlakeRPG, or again, go to Facebook and search The Curse of Silverlake. You can also hear our episodes on our website, and if you're the kind of person that's really interested in homebrew, I have the player's handbook online. I put it online for my players. So I have all the information about how the game works. It's a work in progress, but that website is silverlake.edgeoftheweb.net. Edge of the web, like you're sitting on the edge of the web. silverlake.edgeoftheweb.net.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, it has been a really great time having you on and getting to learn about the podcast and about your fandoms and just getting to actually get to talk to you, because we've talked online back and forth, like on comments or just Facebook messages. So it's been great to actually get to chat with you and have you on.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor, and I'm very grateful for Tales from the Fandom, not just because I was a guest, but because I'm a listener and I love the show.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.